Welcome to the Farm to School podcast, where you will hear stories of how youth thrive and farmers prosper when we learn how to grow, cook, and eat delicious, nutritious local foods in schools across the country
and the world. We're your hosts. I'm Michelle Markestein.
And I'm Rick Sherman.
And I'm thrilled to introduce our guest to you all today. It's one of my heroes in the whole field of school gardening and food systems, Dr. Rose Hayden-Smith, writer, U.S. historian, and emerita from University of California. Hi, Rose.
Hi, Michelle. It's so nice to speak with you and Rick today. So nice to connect again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I always say, if you start looking at school gardens, we say, school gardens, and they still like, what? There's gardens at school. And so people think, there's a lot of gardens at schools. Like in Oregon, we have half of our schools, 788 of our gardens of our schools have a garden. But they think it's a brand new thing. They think it's, that's a new thing. And that's clearly not the case, is it, Rose?
No, it's not the case. And I always also think of school gardens within a larger context of home and community gardening. Mm-hmm. And school gardens have been around for a long time. Rich history of them in Europe and the United States. And one of the things that inspired me, early on, was learning about the history of school gardens in my own community. And that there is a school where, as a 4-H advisor and a garden educator that I worked at, called Lincoln Elementary School, and it's on Ventura's Main Street, and the precursor school was Ann Street Elementary, and during World War I, the students at Ann Street Elementary raised potatoes at the school and kind of depressed the local market for farmers a little bit, right? And reading about in these University of California Ag Experiment documents going back to the beginning of the last century, where teachers from my community were writing to the farm advisors at the University of California, not only asking for gardening advice, but telling them what they were seeing as the value of school gardens and their impact on the well-being of children.
Okay, and you were so passionate about this, you wrote a book about school gardens in America called Sowing the Seeds of Victory, American Gardening Programs of World War I, and I'll leave a note to that in our show notes. But could you tell us about the journey of that 14 years ago when you wrote that? Why were you so excited and passionate about this?
Okay, well, Michelle knows this story, and basically the story was that when I was a much younger person, I was hired by the University of California to run the 4-H program in Ventura County. Large 4-H program, all sorts of community clubs all over this county, which has a really rich agricultural tradition and sort of like a peri-urban farming, just a really rich food systems environment. And I didn't know what I was doing, but the University of California assigned a mentor to me, and his name was Dan Desmond. And Dan Desmond told me early on, he said, one of the best things that you could do to set up a really wonderful sort of holistic educational experience would be to develop a focus for school gardening. And that will open up, sort of become a gateway for food systems education. And I just went, I love this idea. So I got all sorts of support from the University of California. And I proceeded to do that. And so I not only did like garden-based learning, but I got into sort of like, farm to school. And then I also took on managing a master gardener program for my community, my county, through the Cooperative Extension Office. And the work just kept compounding. And I've always been a historian at heart. And one day, Dan forwarded an article to me. And the article was written by a librarian in the state of Texas, O.L. Davis. And it was about something I'd never heard of called the United States School Garden Army. And I went, what is this? And so I did a little tiny bit of research on it. And I went, you know what? I'm going to go back to school. And so I pursued a dual track as a garden-based educator and a food systems person at the university. And then I went back to the University of California, Santa Barbara to earn a master's and a PhD. And I basically, just focused my energy on historical research about school, home, and community gardening in the United States. And my dissertation focused on the period of World War I. And that became the book.
You had that whole chapter in there about the School Garden Army that was just fascinating. And if people just do a search for that, you'll find lots of images of what I guess you could call propaganda posters or whatever of back in the day to get people, interested in that. Can you tell us, our listeners, why they wanted to do a School Garden Army and promote this?
Well, sure. It was a World War I program, and it was really interesting because that program came out of the Bureau of Education. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the first, if not the first, sort of soft national curriculum pieces, right? And so it was multi-purposed because there were many partners in the work. So it was wartime. So they definitely wanted to sort of focus on building a sort of sense of common purpose around the World War I effort. They wanted to raise food on the home front. They wanted to teach kids about ag and gardening because they had the same concerns more than 100 years ago that those of us who work in the food system today have, that kids were becoming disconnected from their food supply, that kids needed to be out in nature more. There was certainly an idea about improving nutrition by some people, right? Yeah. Home economy, beautifying cities, right? And sort of urban uplift. The idea of gardens as a way to strengthen democracy, which I think is one of the more wonderful ideas about it. And there definitely was a very practical aspect which would perhaps enable more food to be sent to mobilized troops and to European allies during wartime, because food security in Europe was very low during World War I. But, people had the organizers had all these different goals. And it was a really interesting program. I mean, garden educators were deployed to schools and to communities to help with school gardens. It was a real heyday of school gardens. And the kids that were involved were encouraged to also do gardening activities at home and in the community. Sure. And there was a lot of propaganda, the posters in World War I, right? And some of the most prominent artists, commercial artists in American life, jumped on board and created some of the most beautiful poster art in our nation's history. And I would really encourage people to go to the Library of Congress website and look up the United States School Garden Army, and you can look at the poster collection, and it's just, you've seen the images. They're stunning.
And there's examples in your book too. I'll leave a note in our show notes about the Library of Congress link. And more so, I mean, there was no National School Lunch Program back in World War I. And we, like you said, we wanted our food to go over to the troops. And so if we were going to feed our kids, it made sense to do this. And they even said things like they called the gardeners soldiers, and they're growing ammo or whatever. But it was very interesting program. Yeah, as you said.
Yeah, it really was. And there was a lot of militarized rhetoric
Yeah.
around the program, United States School Garden Army, and but putting the importance of home gardens up there with, as being fundamental to American defense, right? And a lot of that sort of imagery and rhetoric. And I think that, insignia for the kids, uniforms. And I think that if you were going to do, a national program now, and that's not the kind of frame that I think you'd select, right? But
Right.
it was wartime, and, it was over 100 years ago. But really, remarkable program. And it really impacted the Victory Garden program in World War II, because a number of the people who were involved in launching the very iconic Victory Garden program of World War II were people who had been children in World War I and participated in the United States School Garden Army or participated in sort of the Liberty Victory Garden programs of World War I.
Okay. And I think the first half of your book talks about that history and history about a great multitude of things, not only in school gardens, but like you said, just American gardening as a whole. But I was thinking too, this book came out kind of in the infancy of the resurgence of the school garden movement 14 years ago. And so it was one of the first books, or really only books, that broached that subject. Now, if you had to write it today, a second edition, would you make changes now, or would you do anything different, or where do you see future subjects?
But if I were going to write more to the story, one of the things that I would focus more on would be inclusion, right?
Okay.
And a more critical look at where those programs, because they were created at a certain time in our nation, what they missed, and the lessons that we take from them, what we would carry forward into our current work. Inclusion, right? And looking more critically at people needing land and access, which is kind of problematic sometimes right now, unless we make some changes. And by the way, World War I might provide some models for that, because there were property easements that made gardening possible along like railroad easements and, vacant lot cultivation and things like that. So there actually might be some things there, but I would say inclusion and the fact that people really need to see themselves in the work and to be reflected in the leadership. And the idea of, in that era, it was the progressive era. So you had all the scientific knowledge that was being produced through the land grant system. And it was kind of like, this top down knowledge messaging, right? Whereas I think that a modern movement really needs to encourage, support, and honor the many differences that people bring to gardening and food culture. And the idea now that we could use storytelling and social media to share knowledge and culture in different ways. I mean, social media is really different. I used it in my early work, as Michelle knows well, as a persona called the Victory Grower, and I was very an early adopter of social media platforms to get my work across. And I transitioned from Victory Grower to the UC Food Observer through the Office of the President at the University of California. But I would tell a different story now. And I would also explore, every book you have limited time that you can spend on it and limited pages, right? And a limited focus. I would focus more on race. And so those are the things that I would focus on. One of the things I would love to have people look at the book is that there's very important information in the book about propaganda. There's a whole chapter about propaganda and how that was used during World War I, right? Through poster art. And most of us don't have an objection to the idea of propaganda being used for gardening, right? And I would also say, too, that in World War I, the gardening message was actually pretty inclusive. I mean, the posters were made available in, lots of different languages so that they could reach immigrants. But maybe we ought to look at even what we might consider good propaganda, right? And I would not call them victory gardens now, right? I mean, there's that's a term that is based in a war ethos, and it's not culturally resonant with a lot of people in this country. My dad had a victory garden in Terrell, Texas during World War II when he was a kid, and he remembers it.
Yeah.
But, my dad's gone now. And, a lot of those people that had that direct sort of cultural experience with World War II victory gardens, a lot of those people have passed on. So what can we do that's more inclusive? And what can we all do and can our government do to really make gardening affordable, accessible, supported, encouraged, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, it sounds like a sequel should be happening.
So, in a lot of your writings and things, and even just talking now, it's to summarize. It seems like the historical documents, like when we look at the language, the images, that they tell us a lot about the values and goals and impacts, right? Like that were underlying it. And so we've started talking about some of that with the victory gardens and school garden army. But I'm thinking, like, as a historian looking at our current moment that we're in, how would you characterize our trends in gardens at home and community and schools?
How would I characterize it? Well, I think it's a lot of different things. When the pandemic started, my email blew up and my phone rang off the hook, right? Because people were at home and there was so much interest, a resurgence of interest in gardening. And I think, we've had lots of these sort of ebb and flows in terms of, gardening and adoption and popularity. And I think I would characterize right now as uneven, right? That in some places it's going strong, and in other places it needs supports. And I think that the interest is there. And I also think, too, one of the trends that I see that I celebrate is the wide availability of really good information about gardening. Right? There were periods of time when your primary source was the land grant institution, right? And one of the first things I tell people to do is go to your county master gardener website, because so many excellent resources and amazing program. But information now, so much great information available on social media, and also this trend to sort of video availability about how to garden, on YouTube, on Instagram, and things like that. And I look at my say my Instagram feed, and it's like a really wonderful, happy mix of garden tutorials from people I've never met that are wonderful.
In thinking about that too, in just like characterizing current trends, one of the things we're really seeing as well is, particularly since COVID, is the social emotional learning, the emotional mental health and wellness of humans, and particularly youth, and the interest that educators and communities have in tapping into school gardens and home gardens to improve that.
I think it is a wonderful strategy. And I live, I'm part of a family that we're plant lovers. And I'm sitting out here right now looking at, bees going through my lavender. Um, and I know that the young people that I know that use, growing things as a form of sort of therapy and making sense of a really complex, challenging, and difficult world. And again, I would like to see a more explicit move by institutions, government institutions, to really move forward a movement and really help people coalesce around a sort of growing movement in a way that people can see themselves in it and that is adaptable to people and provides resources for people to do this activity, whether they live in a really dense urban area or whether they live in a rural area. And I think that educators are are among our best allies in gardening work. And I just remember the value of school gardens when I did a school garden program as a volunteer for my daughter's school, beginning in kindergarten all the way up till fifth grade. And then I even did a program at my daughter's middle school. And I still have these kids who are now adults with kids of their own. When I see them in the community, they will come up to me and say, "You have no idea what a positive experience it was for me." And for many, they tell me it influenced their diet, right, in really positive ways. And just what a sort of love, a lifelong love they have of plants and gardening because of that. And so I think it's really worthwhile work.
Thank you so much for influencing my life, but I also want to hear from you, like, what are your suggestions for other folks who want to get involved in gardening and food systems work?
Okay, well, Michelle, thank you so much for that. I'm giving you like a big heart sign with my hands. Thank you. And I would also say I don't think we're thinking big enough, and I want us to think bigger, right? But suggestions, you know, I think one of the best resources is the local Master Gardener program, and each state has a Master Gardener program. They have and they have local components with great websites, free resources, and they're often volunteers that you can connect with. And for school garden work, the Master Gardeners have been incredible all across the United States to support that kind of work. I also find too that the companies that sell seeds, plants, and gardening supplies often have great information on their websites. I learn about different plants every year just by reading my gardening catalogs. If you have children, plant something that germinates quickly, like maybe for carrots. And I think for kids, visit the Texas A&M Junior Master Gardener website, connect with them on the Facebook page. They have incredible science-based activities using materials that people will have at home. It's a 4-H program that emphasizes experiential learning. They have great videos Great videos.
How funny. We just interviewed, our last episode was Randy Seagraves from Texas A&M. So yeah, so everybody
Randy
listen to that.
Seagraves, yeah.
Listen to that
Yeah.
episode for more, and that's perfect segue into that.
Yeah. And so Randy and Lisa have been partners and supported my work for decades. And I think so highly of their work, that curriculum, which is many curricula now, and the resources they make available. They have an absolute fire and passion and love for this work. I also want to tell people you don't need to buy fancy equipment.
Yeah.
And families that might be looking at related activities like meal planning, cooking, what to do with produce, physical activity, gardening, the USDA is the gold standard resource. There are all sorts of tools, apps, quizzes. Even My Plate is now an Alexa skill. And so I would really encourage people to connect and use those resources as well.
That's so weird. You just said an Alexa skill. I didn't know that's part of our vernacular now. That's an Alexa skill now. Interesting.
I know. I know.
Okay. Maybe our podcast will be an Alexa skill someday, Michelle.
Let's make it so.
Okay.
Let's make it so.
Well,
I do want to say really quickly, that gardening, if you're concerned about food security and food supply, gardening is good. If you want variety in your diet, gardening is good. If you're looking for something restorative and a way to be physically active, gardening is good. It's earth friendly. It connects people with nature. It's a great family activity. It's a great way to enhance home learning with children. It feels as if it's something that we can take positive action on in a world that often feels as things are beyond our control. It's a way to acquire new skills. And it's just one of the best things that I do in my life.
Oh, thank you. That's
Wow,
also
man. I
one of the
love
best
that.
things we
I
do.
could take that little bit of a recording that you just said and play it every night before I go to bed. It's
Okay,
what we're
do
all
that. It would be an
about.
Alexa skill.
Yeah.
Gardening sustains
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Okay, Farm to School was written, directed, and produced by Rick Sherman and Michelle Markison and was made possible by a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture.
The content and ideas on Farm to School podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Education, and the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA, Oregon Department of Education, and Oregon State University are equal opportunity providers and employers.
Do you want to learn more about Farm to School? Check out other episodes, show notes, and get in contact with us by searching Farm to School Podcast OSU.
We would love to hear from you. Stop by that website Michelle just mentioned to say hello or give us an idea for a future podcast.
Great. Thanks again, Rose, for joining us.
Thanks, Rose.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.